If you're looking to build a business that can run without you, you've probably heard of these books. This is the essential reading list when it comes to systemizing your small business. If you're Googling anything about this, you've probably heard of these. But as someone who's an expert in systemizing small teams, who's worked with over 2,000 small businesses to build their systems, if my friends or family reached out and were like, hey, Layla, what business book should I read to systemize my operation? Let's just say I wouldn't recommend the full list. To explain why, I'm going to give you a rapid fire summary of each of the books on this list, rank them based on criteria that matters to small team operators like me, and then give you a clear-cut recommendation as to whether you should read it, skim it, or skip it altogether. Everything I'm going to be sharing is from the perspective of a small team, which is what I'm going to define as a team of 3 to 50 people, making 300,000 to 50 million in a given year. Solopreneurs and larger businesses will certainly get value out of this list, but what they need in books is a little bit different than what you and I need. And so that perspective is going to kind of go throughout this entire video as well as the entire channel. Before I even dive in, if you're someone who sees the length of this video and are like, oh my God, I just want to know what books to read, don't make me watch the whole thing, I'm just going to show you the answer. There you go. These are which books you should read and which books you shouldn't. Are you happy now? Congratulations, you can leave. Okay, bye. For the rest of you who actually want to know what these books are and why you should or should not read them, keep watching because I'm going to break them down one by one with a ranking system that's going to help you figure out which are actually the best for your exact situation. So digging right in no particular order, we're going to start off with Work the System. I'm going to rank this and all the other books based on 4 criteria. Number 1, is it persuasive? Does it persuade me as to why systemizing my business would be helpful? Number 2, is it practical? If I believe this is a worthwhile cause, is it going to actually show me how to make this change? Number 3, is it relevant? A lot of these books have been written in the 90s and the 80s. Are they still relevant to us today? And number 4, is it pleasant to read? A lot of these books, maybe it's because of the time, maybe it's because of the authorship, I don't know. A lot of them are freaking boring, and I will tell you which ones are boring so you can appraise for yourself whether or not it's worth your time to suffer through the text. So how does Work the System shake up? Well, for me, in terms of persuasiveness, this was a 1 out of 3. Wasn't very persuasive. It felt very much like, here is what I did. Didn't really draw me in personally. Maybe if I had more in common with the author, I might feel differently about that, but I just didn't really connect. Number 2, in terms of practical steps, there were certainly a lot of them. The reason I'm saying it's a 2 out of 3 rather than a 3 out of 3 is because the amount of work it would take to realistically follow all of these steps felt a bit unrealistic for most small teams that I know. Speaking of businesses I know, let's talk about relevance. On a scale from 1 to 3, I put this in the 2 category. The principles it talked about still felt like they could work today, but again, seems a little heavy for how most teams operate. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, joy to read. 1. We'll leave it at that. So overall, that gives us a score of about 6. If you have tons of extra time, I would read it. Otherwise, I'd probably take it off your reading list. The next book in our lineup is 4-Hour Workweek. 4-Hour Workweek, I would describe as another how I did this kind of book, talking about somebody who did more of the digital nomad online business life before that was really cool, where the author kind of designed their business around what they wanted their lifestyle to be, then designed a very arbitrage-heavy and delegation-heavy business that really made use of virtual assistants and other ways to get cheaper help to make sure the business could run without directly being reliant on their time. This book is massively popular and for good reason. Okay, so ranking the 4-Hour Workweek on this criteria, I would give it a 2 out of 3 on persuasiveness. It had some really good arguments, but largely focused on the lifestyle design elements, which is its core premise. And for many of us who are looking to systemize our business for goals other than working from a beach somewhere, I think there might be stronger arguments, especially for the small business viewer. For the next category of practical examples, I'm giving the 4-Hour Workweek a 3 out of 3. It did a fantastic job giving you specific examples of, what your emails would look like. How would you delegate? What kind of tasks you would delegate? The only thing that would have really made it stronger in my view is if the examples of business design felt a little bit more inclusive. If you read this book, especially today, a lot of the examples are going to feel a little bit online businessy, not applicable to the rest of us mere mortals, a lot of like hack in a weekend kind of stuff that just feels a little bit out of touch with small businesses. Still, I'm going to round up and give it a 3. When it comes to the dated part though, is this information still relevant? This is where the book starts to struggle. Some of the practices in 4-Hour Workweek just feel very, very out of date with the AI heavy, virtual assistant heavy, and just changes in how work happens in this day and age. So I gave it overall a 1 for relevance. But despite all that, joy to read, I actually put 4-Hour Workweek as a 3. There is strong language for people who don't like that. There's a little bit of meandering side tangents, but I think overall it was an engaging read and I found myself getting through it very easily. Granted, I used the audiobook format. Overall, for the 4-Hour Workweek, I would actually say if you're really serious about building systems, I would put it on your reading list. It may not be fully applicable, but there's enough specific examples that I think you could really find information that I have not seen well covered anywhere else. Speaking of well covered, the next book is the eMyth, and this is the book talking about how people get caught working in their business versus on their business. I think Michael Gerber did a great job kind of establishing the space of systems design in some space, really bringing it into the mainstream, and eMyth is probably one of the most popular books in this list because of the great marketing and industry niching that the eMyth enterprise did attach to this book. I think a lot of the commercial success of the eMyth came down to its ranking in this very first category, which is its persuasiveness. It is very clearly written in a way that appeals to logic, which is something I really appreciate in text, and it really makes you clearly understand, that's why I need to build systems in my business. This is why this matters. If you are someone with a leadership team or a business owner or partner who's just not getting why you want to build a business that can run without you, this is a great book to have them read for the persuasiveness power alone. But let's talk about the second half of that coin, which is the practicality. This is where I just struggle. I do not think the eMyth is a book I would grab if I'm looking for practical steps of how do I actually act on the ideas of the eMyth. Yeah, I don't know. It feels very theoretical to me. If I'm asking myself, so what? How do I do that? I don't think I would have a lot of instruction. I'm giving the eMyth a 1 out of 3 on practicality. With a lot of respect for all that they've built, I just don't think the how is the real strength of this text. That brings us on to our next category of relevance today. Overall, because the book is so theoretical and like, here's why this matters, that's a very universal argument. And I think the book is still aging like fine wine and still very much worth reading if you're looking for that persuasive angle in the modern day. In terms of enjoyability to read, I think the reason it's a bestseller is because it's very easy to read. It's very clear. It's very straightforward. Not a lot of funky language with all the flowery text. 3 out of 3 for ease of reading. That puts the eMyth at an overall score of 9 out of a total 12. And that's a solid place to be. But because the text is so much around theory, if I was in your shoes, I would probably read the summary. I know it sounds terrible to say. I mean, read the book if you want to support them, but I would probably read the summary or skim the book rather than read this one in detail because unless you're really confused by the theory, there's not a lot of extra details that you're really going to grab from reading the full text, in my opinion. That brings us to our next book, which is Built to Sell. And Built to Sell, like some of the other ones we'll see on this list, is a story-based book. In other words, it kind of reads like a work of fiction. It feels like you're telling a story about this person who's struggling in their marketing agency. Then, Built to Sell kind of walks through how you can change that agency for the better by making small adjustments to how work happens, essentially by introducing systems and most specifically a productized service. Really great book for anyone who's looking for a primer on what the heck a productized service is. Of course, you could also just watch my video up here, but I digress. I find myself recommending Built to Sell a lot for beginners looking to start systemizing their business because it is so strong in category number 1 of persuasiveness. Personally, it's the first one I'll recommend even before eMyth because it gives you that kind of story-based flow that makes it really easy to get through. However, similar to eMyth, the practical steps when it comes to Built to Sell are a little bit on the weaker side because it's just one case study of this one imaginary person going through this process. It feels a little bit high level, and if you were to use the book as your instruction sheet to start changing your business, you're going to have to make quite a bit of assumptions, so 1 out of 3 on practicality. In terms of relevance, similar to eMyth, it's been holding up tried and true, still a 3 out of 3 in terms of relevance because there aren't too many dated concepts in there. And in terms of joy to read, also a 3 out of 3, just like eMyth, because it's just very clear, straightforward, and that narrative format I'm just a bit of a sucker for as long as it's done well. So overall, Built to Sell, I'm putting at a 10 out of 12, slightly above eMyth, which is kind of reflective of why I tend to grab that one for beginners more than anything else. else. And if I was to tell you whether or not you should read it, I would say, yeah. If you are very early in your journey about systemizing your small business and you need that mixture of persuasiveness, a little bit of practicality, but mainly just something that feels relatable and real, particularly if you're a services business, I would definitely add this one onto your reading list. Next up, we're going to talk about Traction, which is a book that talks about the entrepreneur operating system, or the EOS way of managing your business. Traction is a book that is a full-on codified operating system that tells you how your business should run. It talks about meetings and goal setting and key metrics and performance and roles and the whole kit and caboodle, with a very prescriptive approach to how you should start organizing your team functions, particularly for the leadership layer. A lot of people will consider this a book about systemizing your business, and I think to a degree it is. But largely, I would describe this book as an approach to leading and managing a small business, not necessarily how you actually operate it, if that makes sense. Traction's persuasiveness is about a 2 out of 3. It's fine. It's not going to make you jump up and down, but it's also not going to bore you to tears. And if you have somebody who's mildly interested in systemization, the book will probably keep their pages turning. In terms of practical steps, extremely practical is the approach I would say for Traction. It does a lot of specific actions as long as we are clear we're only talking about the leadership level. If we wanted to zoom in as to what it really takes to systemize full operations, as I hit my microphone, which would include things like task management, knowledge management, and team management, I would probably give it closer to a 1 or a 2 out of 3. But if we're just going to go broadly at systemizing, does it tell you things you can do? Sure. 3 out of 3 in this category. Moving on to the next category of relevance. Is Traction / the EOS approach relevant for small businesses today? My personal opinion, not really. Most people I know who are being incredibly successful in EOS are using what I call EOS-ish, meaning they've stolen a few things that work and then they've made the rest of them go into the trash can. A lot of the EOS stuff to me feels quite dated. It's I remember reading the book recently and it talks about how, well, no one gets anything done until there's a meeting. So let's have more meetings to make sure things get done more often. So rather than getting done once a month, things get done weekly because we have weekly meetings or daily meetings. And it's just like, what if we just want to get work done without needing a meeting to force us into it? That's my main criticism about a lot of the operational ideas inside the EOS framework. However, from a leadership perspective, goal setting, role defining, I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. So in the age of AI and async work, I would give it a 1 to 3 out of relevance. But in terms of joy to read, I would give it a 2 out of 3. There are still valuable pieces in here. And I would say definitely add Traction on your reading list. But rather than reading through it carefully, I would probably put it in the skim category, where a few key ideas will really resonate, but I don't think a page-by-page thorough review is going to be worth your time. That brings us to the next book on our list, which is Team: Getting Things Done with Others. And this is, as the title implies, a book about getting things done, the GTD approach to work management, which involves having an inbox and sorting things down based on location and prioritization metrics that you define. GTD is an insanely popular individual productivity method for tracking knowledge and tasks, and this book attempts to bring it into a team environment by essentially navigating you through case studies, sort of how you might actually take the GTD concepts and put them on a team. Now, full disclaimer, I've actually not read the original text of GTD. I'm just familiar with it from working with clients who use that system. And for the sake of this review, I'm going to assume you haven't read the original GTD either. And so let's talk about the overall value of this approach. When it comes to persuasiveness of the book Team, I would give it a solid 1 out of 3. It was not. It was not. If you know what GTD is and you're already sipping the Kool-Aid and you're like, I want my team to do it, fantastic. You don't need the persuasion piece. If you are more like me and you aren't a huge GTD fan, you are probably going to have a hard time engaging in this text. Which brings us to number 2, practical steps. Now, if I wanted to be a real jerk, I would probably have given this a 1 out of 3, because in terms of the practical steps for how I can use GTD with team, there wasn't really much. It was just like, get your team to use it. However, I am going to be generous here and assume that if you're reading this, you've never read GTD, and the original approach of individual productivity had some pretty interesting practical guidelines of how you keep track of things And so if you were hearing these for the first time in this book, like I was, then you could say is a little bit more practical than it might be for returning viewers. So I'm going to give this a 2 out of 3, just because I'm assuming you might not have read the original text, like I also hadn't at the time of reading this. Now, moving on to the next part of relevance today. Does this still feel current? I mean, this book just came out, so yep, still current. So let's just say 2 out of 3 for the reasons I'm going to address in the next category, which is enjoyable to read. Namely, it was really not enjoyable to read. I am writing my first book now. I recognize I'm a jerk to say this, but for people who are in small business, who do not appreciate flowery language and don't need 14 different prepositions and adjectives and just to say one simple thing, oh my God, I was ready to rip my hair out listening to this book, and I was listening to it, which made it perhaps worse. I remember I was painting my shed while I was listening to this book, and I literally painted half of the freaking shed before the introduction seemed to stop. The whole book was just telling me what the book was going to tell me without telling me what it was trying to tell me. It was insanely frustrating, and if it wasn't for this video, I'm not sure I would have made it through. So if I had a 0 out of 3, it would have 0, but 1 out of 3 it is, giving team an overall score of 6, which feels right. So I would put this one solidly in the if you really, really want to, or if you love GTD, or if you really have a lot of the time, go for it. Otherwise, skip this one and move on. Just go paint your fence in silence. It's better. Now, if team was a bit of a downer, this next one's going to bring you back up with scaling up. So scaling up is arguably a competitor framework to Entrepreneur Operating System. It kind of covers the same scope of how do we manage a business that can scale. However, I do think scaling up kind of understands what it is a little bit more than Traction. Rather than viewing themselves as an operating system, yet only focusing on leadership and management at its core, Scaling Up owns its lane. It really seems to be a book about how do you manage and lead a scalable company, and doesn't really get as lost as Traction does into the weeds of things that it really doesn't know what it's talking about. Scaling Up gives you some pretty clear directives about cash flow, objectives, planning, strategy. It has some stuff about process and responsibility, but it's a very straightforward book on how do you run a business effectively. And I really appreciate that about the Scaling Up approach. Overall, between Traction and Scaling Up, I am much more of a Scaling Up fan. I've read the book multiple times because I just think I keep learning new things. Also, I will say, as opposed to Traction, I really like that Scaling Up is almost like a textbook in a good way. Like it combines dozens and dozens of other books and principles and ideas into one comprehensive text, which is strangely helpful in a way that it does not sound when I'm describing it. But it's good, I promise, it's good. When it comes to Scaling Up, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 3 on persuasiveness. It has really good facts and persuasive arguments, but it's not the most like rah, sham, wow kind of approach that's going to just entice anyone who happens to pick it up. When it comes to practical steps, though, oh my gosh, I'm going to put Scaling Up at a 3 out of 3. Similar to Traction, I think it's practical only at the high level, and it really struggles with the details, but that's okay. I'm going to accept it for what it is. And like Traction, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 3 for the specific exercises and approach. I mean, when I say it's like a textbook, it's like a textbook, and it literally tells you each thing you need to do to systemize your business. If I could give it a 3.5, I probably would in this regard. Moving on to the next piece of relevance, I think Scaling Up is highly relevant today. There are a few concepts and references just because it is such a massive scope that do feel out of date. Similar to Traction, we've got this emphasis of meetings. We've got this very PDF worksheet style approach to organizing a team, which is a little outdated to how small businesses typically work in usually software rather than PDFs. But still giving it a 2 out of 3. And in terms of enjoyable to read, I think it is very well written. It has a lot of great ideas, but again, it's got that textbook double-edged sword. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 3 rather than the 3 out of 3 we see on the more enjoyable and narrative books. Overall, Scaling Up ends up with a score of 9, which puts it solidly on the read list. Like if you are looking to build out your shopping cart of what books should I go through, if I really want to become a business owner, rather than someone who's working in my business and start to implement the ideas from eMyth, I would add Scaling Up to your checkout cart or go get it from the library and read through it carefully. I have read Scaling Up many times at this point, and every time I read through it, I learn something meaningful and new. I find a new author that's mentioned that I then want to read the source material of. I definitely recommend this book being one of the first you put on your list, but there's a few more we have to go over next. Now, the next book on our list is called Clockwork by Mike Michalowicz, who is also the author of Profit First, which is a popular book that kind of gives you the 101 of bookkeeping. What Profit First attempted to do for bookkeeping, I really think Clockwork is attempting to do for the idea of delegation and role definition in small businesses. And this one really stood out to me because for a long time here at ProcessDriven, I have looked up to the book Profit First. I think what they did for bookkeeping and financial management for small businesses is really admirable and kind of what I'd like to see ProcessDriven do for small business operations. So when I found out that the author of that had written this, I was like, oh God, maybe my work is done. Fortunately or not, that was not the case. So Clockwork, I think, is a great book to describe how you can figure out what is really your job versus other people. And it promises a lot more about how you organize your team, but I think respectfully, I would probably focus it in that scope if I'm really going to tell you what I would read the book looking for. Clockwork, written by Mike Michalowicz and his ghostwriter, AJ Harper, who I'm actually reading her book right now, so it's kind of fun to see the worlds collide. What makes it so great is its persuasive power. It is a bestseller in part, I suspect, because it is so accessible. If you start reading through the pages, it won't feel like you're reading a boring business book, and by the end of it, you'll be convinced that you need to find your queen bee role and figure out what you should be doing. So for persuasiveness, I'm giving this a 3 out of 3. When it comes to practical steps, though, closer to a 2 out of 3. There's some specific exercises you can go through, which is fantastic. But again, this book is really just about defining what role you should have in the business, very simplified approaches outside of that. And so I don't think you're going to get a lot of practical takeaways from this, especially if you're not very much struggling with delegation. By the way, I know like many of the books here, what I'm sharing is just my opinion. You might not agree with it. That's okay. That's what the internet is for. Share your opinions in the comments below, because if any of these books I'm saying are like, meh, and you're like, no, they're amazing, I would love to hear your thoughts. Help your fellow small business owners out by writing that in the description below and explaining your must-read list for small businesses. That would be a huge help. Now, this last ranking is going to be probably my most contentious, but when it comes to joy to read, I'm going to give Clockwork a 1 out of 3. I don't know what it is about Clockwork, the term queen bee role, some of the phrasing in this book, it just gives like this weird mix of like girl boss with soccer dad, and I just did not enjoy the tone of it and the vibe. With respect, I know a lot of people love it. I had a really hard time finishing this one. So in terms of Clockwork, I would say if you have time, definitely read it. It's overall getting a high score for me. I just not like reading it, so it's not one I grab off the shelf when folks are asking for recommendations. This brings me to my next one, which is Systemology by David Jennings. Systemology is an approach to systemizing teams from the perspective of somebody who runs a software company and certification program that helps people document their processes. So this is very much focused on how do we write down the things we do in a way that gets them out of our head. And I love the concept of this book because writing down what you do is a key part of systemizing, and none of these other books really talk about it, in part because it's so boring. But this book does a really nice job. So if you're trying to figure out, how do I start writing things down? How would that even work? I think Systemology is a great approach to help you figure out what does this massive effort of writing down standard operating procedures actually look like in reality. But now on to the ranking side. So in terms of persuasiveness, I would give this a 2 out of 3. It's not going to make you say, oh my God, I need systems. But if you're already keen on the idea, it's going to pull you in further in a positive way. The next section of practical steps, I'm giving this book a 1 out of 3. And this is with a lot of respect to David and everything he's built. But I think the overall approach to systemizing the business feels a little funky for a small business. I think larger businesses could find this to be a lot more practical, but a lot of the activities and exercises described in Systemology, I feel like are better served for... Sometimes it feels like it's selling the software that helps you write down your systems rather than actually telling you how to write down your systems. And I Hate to say that because I know there are a lot of books in this category who do the same thing. They're always, I think Work the System is also one of these where they're like, and you should use our proprietary software, blah, blah, blah. Something about having so many of those plugs just makes it feel so much less relatable because the whole time I'm like, oh, okay, so I just have to use your proprietary software and then everything's easier and work with your certified consultants and everything's easy. It's just practically, if I was a small business owner trying to follow Systemology to start organizing my business, I think I would hit a pretty fast wall of almost feeling like I needed to pay money in order for this to actually work. In terms of relevance today, Systemology is not that old of a book, so I would say about 2 out of 3. There's not a lot that feels outdated other than the software promotion. And in terms of joy to read, 2 out of 3, I mean, it's fine. Nothing remarkable, nothing terrible. It's just kind of like a very straightforward business book. Overall, Systemology falls in at a 7. So what I would say is if you find yourself with lots of time or an Audible credit to burn, by all means, but probably wouldn't be the first one I grab if I'm looking to systemize my business. Next up, we have The Goal. And this book is very near and dear to my heart because it is the book that set me on my trajectory of getting into the space of business systems and processes. The Goal is similar to Built to Sell in the sense that it is a narrative book. So you're kind of going through the story with characters, with dialogue back and forth. And it follows the story of a manufacturing business that is struggling with getting orders through the system. And what the book introduces is things like the theory of constraints, throughput, and these other measures of how to know if your system is actually working, with a lot of really specific examples around the manufacturing arena that, with a little creativity, you can apply to any other business as well. Now, in terms of persuasiveness, I wanted to put this as a 3 out of 3 because clearly it was persuasive enough to set me on my course. But when I think about the average reader and my average small business client, I'm going to say 2 out of 3. I think you kind of have to already be very curious about the nerdy side of the stuff to really appreciate this text for what it is. So 2 out of 3 in this category. Number 2 is practicality. So because this is that narrative case study format and it has a manufacturing example, I'm going to give it a 1 out of 3 for practicality. I think if you're outside of that sector, I think if you're not working in the process space, it does a great job of teaching you concepts, but practical application is something you will have to translate after reading the book. That brings us to relevance today. I would put this book at a 2 out of 3. It still makes sense because it's a narrative structure. It hasn't really aged too much. The dialogue might feel a little dated in some pretty obvious ways, but there's still a lot of value to be gained. In terms of joy to read, I put this one as a 3 out of 3. I think there's other people I've recommended this book to who would probably say it's a 2 out of 3. So let's just put it at the optimistic score of an overall 8. And even though it is one of my favorite books about process, I would say only read this one if you are a hardcore nerd or you find yourself with extra time, not an essential one as much as I enjoy it. Now, speaking of enjoying, I actually picked up this next book based on enjoying a wonderful conversation with its author at a meetup event a few years back. Team Habits is a book by Charlie Gilkey that describes operating systems or patterns or habits that are specifically poised to help small teams work together. Charlie brings his experience in operations as well as in the military into this almost intellectual discussion about how do we actually operate as a team and what are the practices we can practically do to allow ourselves to work better together. Overall, I think this Team Habits book is definitely a book by and for nerds. So if you are someone who is a team manager, a leader, or just someone who works on a team who's looking to have your team work together more efficiently, oh my God, I used the word team a lot in that explanation. Team Habits is a great read. However, I don't think it's going to do a great job of appealing to people who aren't already interested in this topic. It's just so dense and nerdy in spots that I don't think this is going to be that, eMyth replacement or Built to Sell replacement. So I actually gave this a 1 out of 3 in persuasiveness. I really think this is more of an insider's book. Moving on to the next category of practical steps. This is where the book really shines. As always, it seems like these are always opposites for folks. But I think Charlie does a great job giving you very specific steps of what you can install in your team to get yourself more organized. In fact, I even had a client of mine, Ellen, who flagged this book and was like, oh my gosh, the practices in this were so helpful to me because she was able to take things from the book and immediately apply them into her business, which gives us a solid 3 out of 3. Now, in terms of relevance, this book just came out. It's brand new. It's very of the time. So I would give this a 3 out of 3 in relevance. But in the joy to read category, I think is where it gets a little bit more difficult for me. I'm someone who is not a great reader. I feel like we've talked about this already here. I love reading, but I mainly listen. And this book definitely got to be a little bit theoretical and intellectual, which I enjoy in conversations, but is hard for me to follow in books. So I gave this one a 2 out of 3 in joy to read. It kind of reminded me of the books I've read by Tara McMullen and, just very intellectual, which is, it sounds, just owning it, right? Like intellectual made me overwhelmed. I am not that smart. And if you are very smart, you may love this. I was too dumb. And so I'm putting this at a 2 out of 3 for enjoyable to read. Overall, putting this as a 9. I would say the book is a great one to skim. Probably not one I would stop everything in my tracks to go pick up and read right now. Speaking of stopping in my tracks, I recently ran into this one at a bookshop while at a mastermind event when we were seeking air conditioning. Atomic Habits by James Clear is a international, at this point, I think, bestseller. It is a massively popular book about the power of habits. And I put it on this list reluctantly because it's not really a book about systemizing your business. It's more about the power of habits and how you can create habits, much like the premise of Work the System, in order to build a better life. The difference is Atomic Habits took a quite mainstream approach to talking about the ideas, kept the concepts very simple, added a ton of anecdotes, and made it a very broad appeal book. I didn't originally want to include it on this list, but I have so many clients who cite Atomic Habits as one of the reasons why they started organizing their business that I was like, all right, let's put it on the lineup. As with many of the overwhelmingly popular books on this list, Atomic Habits kills it on the persuasive power. 3 out of 3, super enticing. I was talking to my editor for my own book recently, and she was talking about how, wow, Atomic Habits is one of those books you just pick up, you start reading, and you don't even know what the book is about, but you keep reading because of the catchy introductions and the stories all the way through. Rochelle makes very great points, and so I want to highlight that to you here as well. If you're looking to get somebody bought into the power of establishing good habits and good practices that you do regularly to replace the not so good habits in your life, this book would be a good one to add to the list. In terms of practical steps, I'm giving this a 1 out of 3. Yes, it talks about how you can reform habits, but it is very much focused on an individual basis. Yes, you can apply them to work, but it's going to require you to do a lot of mental work. In terms of relevance today, like most bestsellers, I would say this is a 3 out of 3 still. It's a pretty universal, evergreen topic. I don't see habits going out of style anytime soon, so 3 out of 3 on this one. When it comes to joy to read, however, I would say, similar to the other bestsellers, actually, I'm going to give this a 2 out of 3 because, like many of the bestsellers, I found myself getting bored. This style of book has this tendency to follow this rhythm of, let me tell you a compelling story. Here's something you should believe. Here's a reason you should believe it. 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 And it just feels like so many words to make a point that I want to lose my mind. I'm like, dude, I don't need a 14th anecdote to prove to me why habits are helpful. And yet, so for me, I put it as a 2 out of 3. It was just far too repetitive. I also recognize that's why people like it, because you can pick it up and put it down whenever you want. But overall, that puts Atomic Habits as a 9 out of 12 for a book to read if you're looking to systemize your business. However, because of the repetitiveness and the lack of direct connection to systemizing your business, I'm going to put it in the skim category. Meaning, if you listen to a podcast interview or get the book and skim over key sections, amazing. I probably wouldn't comb through it piece by piece by piece. And this is going to sound terrible, but the next one on my list is pretty much the same exact result. Checklist Manifesto is another book that my clients seem to read again and again while they're trying to figure out, how do I become the CEO of my business? And without fail, Checklist Manifesto somehow ends up onto the CEO's desk. Checklist Manifesto is exactly what the title says. It is a manifesto and collection of case studies of why checklists are powerful. I would say Checklist Manifesto is a fantastic book if you're looking to collect examples of why checklists are helpful. Yeah, that's why to read it. And sassiness aside, it is a really entertaining book. I think it's really interesting to hear these niche situations where having a checklist really changed lives or changed the world in some way. But similar to Atomic Habits, the scoring is actually identical. Super persuasive, 3 out of 3. Practical, not really, 1 out of 3. Relevant today, definitely 3 out of 3. But enjoyable to read, 2 out of 3, because I found myself losing my mind. I was convinced 20 pages in that yes, checklists are helpful. And then we had hundreds of pages left to go. Or we had many pages left to go. And I just found myself wanting to skip over sections because, again, not a great attention span. So overall, I give Checklist Manifesto an identical score to Atomic Habits, bringing it in at a 9 out of 12. Great book to collect and talk about at a dinner party. Not necessarily the best book to read to systemize your business, unless you really need to add more stats into your persuasive score. Overall, I would say put this on your skimming list. Skim key sections, read a blog post, or listen to a podcast. I wouldn't stop everything to read the full thing. That brings me to the last book, and this is probably going to be the worst one in the lineup because it is mine. I'm doing all this research and reading all these books because this is what I do for a living. And after recommending these books again and again and again over years with caveats and hour-long recordings where I go through the pros and cons of each approach, I decided it's time to write my own. And is it going to be a must-read? Probably not. It'll probably suck. I shouldn't say that. My benchmark for writing this book is to make sure it is persuasive and practical and highly relevant today while also being enjoyable to read and feel like someone's just talking to you rather than this academic research paper that you're expected to digest. But that all starts with you. So if you're someone who's read any of the books on this page and you have opinions as to what makes a great business book or what you'd like to see in the next book that comes out to help you systemize your small business, I actually have a link in the description below where you can join my email list to be involved in the book writing process. And no, I'm not just writing it so that one of these books is written by a woman, but also, how are none of these books written by a woman? What the hell? Most small business operators are women. I know traditionally authors are sitting in their caves and writing and then I've finished everything. That's not the approach I'm taking for this book. I'll be sending out polls and behind the scenes snippets to anyone who joins that list over the coming year. And if you want to be involved in the process of what I hope will be a future bestseller, it all starts by just heading to the description below, even if it's just to check out some of these other books as well. Thanks so much for watching and enjoy the process.